Lucifer looked calmly at the man before him, his voice as if he had known the outcome countless eons ago. He said that Yahweh had sealed the circle of eternity from the very beginning, locking it from the outside so that no one could return. According to him, the Father's intention was not to rule himself, but for his two sons to follow, even though neither had long since ceased to care about the throne. It was this indifference that made Lucifer understand that every species in creation would rush to claim supremacy, and unless the host intervened, chaos would be inevitable. That premonition came true sooner than he expected. When he and Mazikeen returned to the Lux, the familiarity of the place was torn apart by the sight of the Titans, Garamas, and Gyges trying to open the gate to heaven through his own path. Lucifer merely chuckled, a mocking, arrogant laugh, and focused his energy on the two giant brothers, as if a wave of his hand would be enough to incinerate them. But when the last of the flames died down, the two Titans still stood tall, unscarred. Lucifer looked momentarily confused. Garamas and Gyges spoke to him with a tone that was both sarcastic and contemptuous. They said that Lucifer's fire had once terrified all living things when Yahweh ruled over all creation, but now it was different. Now that ultimate power had fallen into their hands, his power was meaningless. They pushed Lucifer aside like a harmless little creature and headed straight for the gate. Lucifer did not stop them. He told Mazikeen to guard the entrance, and if he did not return in time to lead Lelim to the Silver City, she was to hold the place as long as possible and let her grief find its way. With that, he stepped through the portal and was instantly sucked into the crimson earth of Hell, Ephrael's ancient domain. Before him, the two Titans snarled, not understanding how Lucifer had deceived them. He only replied that his will was still his and would remain so. Lucifer approached Ephrael's giant skull, recounting the dark history of this creature that had once terrorized him. He said that death to him was only a temporary state. If he so desired, what had been destroyed could be pulled back from the abyss. The earth split open as Ephrael slowly rose, his giant body arching as if obeying Lucifer's final commands. And before the resurrected one could roar, Lucifer soared into the sky, leaving Garamas and Gyges to fight as he bought time for the final battle. He headed for the Silver City and was immediately met by the spears of the Legion. The angels were ordered not to let him in, for the will of the Father kept him from this place. Lucifer looked at them as if they were a stupid and indifferent wall, and was just a moment away from crushing their ranks, frustrated by their blindness. But Uriel appeared just in time, ordering the way to be cleared so that Lucifer could go to Michael, the eldest brother who was huddled in a corner, drowning in his own anger. The meeting between Lucifer and Michael quickly fell into a stalemate. Michael, already broken from the inside, looked at his brother with a gaze that grew colder by the minute. The chaos in his mind made him despise every word Lucifer said and ignore the fate of the entire universe as if it no longer had anything to do with him. Lucifer looked at his brother for a long time, then decided not to waste any more time. He placed a piece of cloth in Michael's hand and told him that if Elaine died at the hands of the Titans, he could cover his eyes so that he wouldn't have to see the consequences of his indifference. Leaving Michael, Lucifer went to Uriel and asked to open the armory. He said that if he had to face a dark future, he would at least want something to fight it with. Uriel complied. He brought out the armor and sword that Uriel had crafted for Lucifer when Lucifer was still a god in heaven. The fall had left them forgotten, never to be used even once. Their conversation was interrupted by a sound from the courtyard outside. When Lucifer and Uriel emerged, they found Zonaquel holding Mazikeen's blade to her throat. Zonaquel had not come to confront her, but to deliver news. She and Beatrice had discovered that the Titans had a new weapon, a doinum, created from Beatrice's own memories. It could incapacitate Lucifer on contact, and if it did, both he and Beatrice would be destroyed. Hearing this, Lucifer immediately realized the missing piece of the puzzle. A new plan was born in his mind. He discussed Beatrice's fate with Mazikeen as she stood there, her eyes cold but unwavering. When Lucifer's duinum appeared at the Silver Citadel, it instantly killed the two angels guarding it and then charged straight toward its sole target. Lucifer did not confront it head-on. He only threw out a wave of power to distract the creature, then disappeared in a flash. At that moment, Garamas and Gyges entered. The Titans quickly retrieved their weapons and began wreaking havoc on heaven. Lucifer responded with his usual disdain. He lured Gyges with his own foolishness, causing the Titan to accidentally attack his own brother, but Garamas was not fooled. A wave of his hand was enough to knock Lucifer to the ground, and Duinum immediately pounced to finish him off. The creature tightened its grip around Lucifer's neck, choking his every breath. No one stepped forward to help. Michael rose from Yahweh's throne, but his rage was directed at the Titan, not at protecting his brother. Just when Lucifer thought it was all over, Mazikeen completed the ritual she had performed on Beatrice. She drove a sword deep into Beatrice's abdomen, not to harm her, but to the thing that controlled Garamas, Gyges, and Duinum's existence. In an instant, the two titans were erased from existence. Duinum lost all power over Lucifer and was nothing more than an empty shell. He tore it apart without resistance. Lucifer turned to Michael and explained. According to him, Beatrice was the only bridge for the Titans to reach him, and in turn, he reached them through that bridge, killing them before they could transform into the new Yahweh. Everything happened just as he had planned, and when he was done, Lucifer left heaven without trying to mend the rift with Michael. The rift between them remained like a bottomless chasm. News of the battle at the Silver City spread soon after. In another corner of reality, a meeting was called by the demons. The one presiding was the spirit of John Baxter Sewell. The meeting included both Lucifer's loyalists and those who were not on his side. They argued fiercely, most of them ignorant of what was going on in heaven, but still inadvertently deducing a few things that were true. The final conclusion was that they needed Lucifer, the morning star, to illuminate the mystery that pervaded the heavens. Someone stood up and said that he had been invited, and that he would appear at any moment. Finally, the figure that all the demons had been waiting for appeared. But the wait turned out to be an illusion. What they thought was a leader left behind was actually a disaster in a familiar form. He stood before the group, his voice calm but enough to suffocate the fragile hope of everyone. He said that he had predicted that they would take advantage of the chaos to try to get into the game, and since his plan required reality to maintain its order, any interference had to be stopped. With that, he closed the door and left, leaving only a few souls he thought could have been spared. John Baxter Sewell fell out of the window in the tearing wind, bringing himself to his death. And as his soul shattered, all the entities sealed within him were dragged into the void. At the moment when the heavens shook, Lucifer asserted his power by declaring that in his realm, immortals must leave or perish. He entrusted this job to Elaine Belloc. He confessed that if he did it himself, he would wipe them all out without a second's hesitation, so entrusting Elaine was the only way to maintain a minimum of mercy. Elaine accepted, acting in his stead without his involvement, and Mazikeen was ordered to give her absolute loyalty. Time passed, and Yahweh's creation continued to be in danger, and in the meantime, an invitation was sent to Lucifer Morningstar, asking him to come to the House of Destiny of the Infinite. The sender promised that if Lucifer appeared, he would receive knowledge that could serve his purposes. Lucifer considered it carefully, but ultimately agreed to go, partly because Elaine had also been called to help someone in the House of Destiny. So they went to the Garden of Forking Ways together, entered Destiny's mansion, and sat down to eat according to the host's reception ceremony. It was then that Michael appeared and found his daughter and brother sitting calmly in Destiny's residence. He was in a bad mood. Lucifer looked at Michael, then turned his eyes to Destiny and made a challenging proposal. He asked if Destiny would bet that before the meal was over, Lucifer would do something not written in the Book of Destiny. Destiny replied that everything was already written in the book. Sirius was like a spear. Lucifer smiled and said that if that was the case, then bet him that he did something that was not in the book. Destiny could not lose. At that moment, Elaine laughed at the familiar overconfidence and quipped that Lucifer was the living embodiment of testosterone. The conversation took a completely different turn when Elaine accidentally asked Michael if heaven had recovered from the invasion of Garamas and Gyges. The question hit a festering wound. Michael began complaining that the entire multiverse was under threat because Yahweh had withdrawn from his role and abandoned creation. Elaine was stunned by this information. Lucifer then spoke up to explain that only Yahweh's universe was caught up in the chaos, while his realm was completely unaffected. Michael turned to Lucifer with a bitter tone. He said that since it had nothing to do with Lucifer, he didn't care and certainly had no reason to help. While the two of them discussed the dangers that surrounded them, they turned their eyes to Destiny. They believed that from his book, some solution or clue might emerge. When they asked him to read it, Destiny only responded with a cold warning. He said that if the book were read aloud, it would become part of the story it was telling, and that the danger was as great as the one they wanted to prevent. He asserted that the history of creation was at a tipping point where the slightest movement could tip the scales. Michael couldn't sit still for another second. He shot up into the sky in a white light, and Elaine, feeling the responsibility that had fallen on her, followed. In Destiny's silent mansion, between walls where every possibility was sealed into law, Lucifer sat across from the eldest brother of the Endless. They spoke in a monotone, but each word carried the weight of many ages of hostility. To Lucifer, destiny was more than an individual. He was the embodiment of what he had fought against since the beginning of time, the bondage of predestination. Destiny was the pillar of the invisible prison that had followed Lucifer throughout his existence. At the end of the table, Lucifer stood up and walked toward Destiny, who sat motionless as a breathing statue. He said that karma was never a chain unless someone made it a prison. If the writer of a book built a prison, then every page was the bars. Destiny raised her eyes, not out of offense, but simply out of understanding. He said the metaphor didn't register with him, but if forced to choose, he would rather have a prison than a mental institution. The reply, cold and sharp as a knife, pierced Lucifer as he realized Destiny was referring to the world he had created. It was the moment Lucifer's composure broke. He reached out and ripped a few pages from the eternal book. The torn pages had no time to protest. They were burned into the fire of the light Lucifer had always considered his own and turned to black ash. He watched the embers die down, convinced he had just made Destiny take a step back in the game of power. Lucifer said, his voice ringing like a bell closing a chapter, "Now you are both in the dark." But Destiny only told him to look closely at the ashes. The half-burned papers were aligning themselves. Soon, two words appeared as if they had always been there, Fenris and Yggdrasil. "Now you've changed your mind," Destiny said. Realizing the meaning of those two names, Lucifer broke free from the House of Destiny and flew back to Silver City like a hunted light. For the first time in a long time, he seemed genuinely worried. Uriel noticed this difference in Elaine Belloc as he stood with her in a tower of Silver City. Elaine had seen her father use his power to save the universe, but she didn't understand how. Uriel patiently explained. According to him, Michael was using Dunamis Demiurgos to rebuild the fundamental particles of creation, regenerating everything at the expense of his own strength. Michael was burning himself to sustain the life of everything out there, but as he finished speaking, a beam of light poured in from the window. Lucifer landed, his wings spread wide behind him like an ominous shadow. His voice came from behind Uriel, calm but with an underlying icy edge. "Call it what you will, Uriel, the wolf is at the door, and Michael's ways will not save anything." Uriel paused. He understood what Lucifer meant, but he had not yet pieced it all together. For a moment later, Lucifer was walking down the streets of Silver City. The Holy Spirit followed him silently. Uriel, impatient, tried to stop Lucifer, not understanding why he would want to stop Michael at such a crucial moment. The idea that Michael had to be stopped seemed like the ravings of a madman, but Lucifer continued on, his voice low as he said that under any other circumstances, Michael's actions would have succeeded. In times of peace, things would have gone according to God's will. But these were not times of peace. Fenris was wandering around looking for Yggdrasil, and when that happened, all miracles of regeneration would have been meaningless. Lucifer knew better than anyone. If Fenris could touch the world tree, even Michael's sacrifice wouldn't be enough to stop what was coming. Lucifer didn't waste another word as he left the sky above Silver City, passing through the brilliant light toward the Word, the sacred chamber at the top of the tower where the echoes of God's Word had existed since the beginning. Before the only window that had always been open to the infinite, he landed on the stone platform, calling Michael to wake him from his trance, but his brother didn't move. Lucifer muttered something, almost to himself, that if Michael didn't wake, they would have to take another path. A moment later, he was back in his old position, but this time, Elaine and Uriel stood beside him. Uriel still couldn't understand why Lucifer was suddenly interfering in heaven's affairs, something he had never bothered to do before. Lucifer didn't answer Uriel's doubts. He only said that Yggdrasil was one of the origins of all things, and that when Fenris touched it, his entire plan to stand aside from Yahweh's destruction of the universe was shattered. Elaine was about to protest when he admitted his intention to abandon everything, but Lucifer did not let her speak. He continued, his voice calm but filled with an undercurrent of storm, that the wolf's actions could shake the very foundations of creation that he himself had helped establish, and that he would never allow. As the last words left his lips, Lucifer placed both hands on the outer wall of the tower. He told Uriel and Elaine to leave to avoid disaster. Just as their wings began to separate from the stone, a sea of sacred fire erupted from Lucifer's palms and spread throughout the majestic structure before them. The tower was stripped away in an instant, collapsing into ashes. From the embers of the ruins, Michael stepped out, his face no longer gentle. With just a glance, he understood what had just happened. Michael's voice echoed like thunder in the sky, demanding that Lucifer say what he had to say before he called the entire legion to witness and silence Lucifer forever. We do not witness that argument here, but hear its echoes in Svartalfheim, where the two brothers stood beside Elaine on the edge of a deep black cliff. In the sky above them, the angelic army gathered like a storm of white light, awaiting orders. Lucifer did not speak to Michael, but turned to Uriel and asked him to arrange guards so that no one would interfere with the three of them doing what was about to happen. Only when everything was settled did Michael ask the question that had been haunting him since before: why this journey did not take place in the physical realm, so why had Lucifer led them to Svartalfheim? Lucifer answered in his usual way, vague but purposeful. He said that Yggdrasil wished to be approached from this direction and that the road ahead would be less treacherous. But he also confessed that it was just a point of view and that it might not be the easiest path. Meanwhile, in a place more of chaos than light, Fenris the Wolf prepared Charlie Gilmore for a terrible task. The wolf knew the world tree better than any angel and needed a chariot to take him there. Charlie, tormented by the promise that his wife and child would be returned if he served Fenris, accepted. He began his journey through the white oblivion, standing between the whirlwind of paradox and the whispers of lost souls. At one point, Charlie saw three celestial figures. One, bleeding from his power, was Michael. Another, radiating a worn-out will, was Lucifer. And the other, Elaine, seemed to let blood run red from her unfocused eyes. In the end, Charlie brought Fenris, the trickster, and Bet Jogi to the roots of Yggdrasil, safer than he thought. But Lucifer and his two companions were not so lucky. They landed not on foot, but in a fall from the sky where the world tree stood. When the impact ended, only Elaine remained conscious, and she found herself unable to see.